solemnly swear that I am up to no good.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to episode 1 of Potter, a Harry Potter and Wizarding World podcast. Before I'll start with the chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, I just wanted to give a heads up on the fact that I have read this Harry Potter series once before, and this would be a second time around. While reading this series for the second time, I would be a bit more diligent to pick up on the breadcrumbs of hints that J.K. Rowling had spread throughout the series. So that's one thing that I would be doing. And also, while reading through these books and the various chapters, I would be looking into clues, and if possible, I would be giving a sort of Easter egg that might help some of you all who have read this series once before, with like me, so they can also understand that these Easter eggs would come in handy later. And I would also try not to give any spoilers to anyone who is listening to the podcast and have never read Harry Potter. So to these people, I would say, like, please do take your time out and go and read this series, because it is genuinely very good and it's worth your time. So that's something I would say to anyone who have not read this series, even though I will try to not give any spoilers to these people. While I would be reading this series, apart from giving the Easter eggs, I would also try to highlight few things that I feel would be important and look out for these things, and they might come in handy in the next chapter or even in the next book. Without wasting much time, let's get into chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which is The Boy Who Lived. When I started reading this chapter, since I'm reading it after almost a decade, I never realized that this chapter started with the point of view of the Dursleys, because I always imagined like this chapter started with Dumbledore coming to Privet Drive and using his Deluminator to take out all the lights. So that's what something I always had in my mind. But while I started reading this book, that's when I realized that, oh, J.K. Rowling had a completely different start of this book in comparison to what we used to see in the movies. So that was something of a surprise. And one thing that I really liked, and I would also tell you all to keep in mind, is to look into this type of sassy writing that J.K. Rowling writes. So when started introducing about the Dursleys, they said that they are perfectly normal. Thank you very much. So this sassy nature of J.K. Rowling's writing is something that you should watch out for, and it just comes down into few of the characters and their traits is this sassy character. And one of my favorite character is also someone who has this sassy nature and has rhetorical answer to everything that someone has for them. So that's something I would say to look out for. Apart from that, I really liked how this particular chapter started, where they see J.K. Rowling introduced the Dursleys with the introduction of Vernon Dursley, Petunia Dursley, and even Dudley Dursley. So there's one thing that I always had a problem was with the naming of Dudley Dursley. Like, which parent names their kid Dudley Dursley? They are naming them in such a way that they are bound to be bullied in the school. But this over here, it turns around and he's the one who's the bully. So that's something that's a bit different. But introduction about the Dursleys and how they are a normal people, and how Vernon has a large neck of Vernon Dursley, and Petunia, like how she is twice the neck. And Petunia always reminds me of the neighbor aunties that we have, who would always be on their window looking into what the other people are doing, going into the other people's life, rather than being at their home minding their own business. But Petunia is one of that kind, and I'm so happy that JK brought in a character like Petunia. While these three characters are here, given a bit brief about where Vernon is working, and also how they are different from the Potters, because Petunia has a sister who is totally different from what Vernon and Petunia are. I will be talking about them a bit more later. The story started on Tuesday. Tuesday is something that we need to remember. Just as usual, Vernon was going to his job where he is, I think so, probably someone who makes drill or deals with drills. When he was going for a job, he saw that around the corner of Privet Drive, he saw a cat reading a map. I can see where Vernon's headspace is because we can also be puzzled when we see a cat in our neighborhood who is looking to a map. That's something we would also be a bit like, what's that happening? Why is the cat reading a map? Or is the cat reading a map, or is it just looking at it? And just a heads up, this is not the last time that you would be hearing about this cat. This cat will again make an appearance, so watch out for that. Apart from this cat, Vernon also saw a very peculiar group of people who were wearing cloaks and very brightly colored hats. Vernon, like JK had mentioned prior, that they are perfectly normal family, and seeing someone who wears these outlandish clothes, that's really something that he does not like about people who are different. Apart from that, the other thing that happens throughout this morning is something that's similar, wherein various instances of owls flying throughout the city. The first instant there's something different was when Vernon went out to have lunch, and that's when he heard the name about the Potters. He was a bit confused about whether they are talking about the sister of Petunia. They were also talking about Harry. This is something that J.K. Rowling had tried to induce into this chapter from the onset. Like, she wanted to create a great buzz about the protagonist of the story, that is Harry Potter, for both us who are the readers and also for the character in this story, that is Vernon Dursley. These omens that are happening is potentially creating a type of aura around Harry Potter. So that's something that I really like, that how she created it. Once the day is almost over, Vernon comes back to his home. That's when Petunia starts talking about their neighbors rather than telling Vernon how her day was and rather than asking him how his day was. So that was something completely different, and this particular character of hers where she is more interested about the neighbors is something J.K. Rowling would be constantly mentioning throughout this series. When Vernon put on the news channels, I remember, and it's a dialogue that you should remember. Listening to news again? Well, it changes every day. This is a dialogue that I remember from the Harry Potter series, and I won't be telling from which book it is. And if anyone remembers it, that's the person who is reading Harry Potter quite diligently and they knows everything about it. In the news channel also, it's been discussed about how there are shower of stars, number of owls that are in the city. Just before Vernon was about to sleep, he said that he as a Dursley would be better off from these type of people who are the Potters, and thought that he himself is way better all the factors rather than these Potters. So that's something that we should look out for, because I'll be talking about it a bit further within the next 5-10 minutes. Once the night falls, and here we are introduced to the great Albus Dumbledore. He has blue eyes and he has a long white hair and beard. But something that surprised me, and I don't know how, like, I think I mentioned it just for a few minutes back about the Illuminator. So like how in the movies Dumbledore came in with the illuminator and took out the lights of the street. But in the book, it was termed as put outer. That's something I was confused about, because I always remember this as the illuminator, not as a put outer. This is something that I should keep an eye on and see when they change its name from put outer to illuminator. Here Dumbledore is introduced, and then the shabby cat with spectacle-like eyes was Professor Minerva McGonagall. Here McGonagall was talking to Dumbledore about all the outlandish parties and celebration that the wizards were doing. That was overall in the news channels. They should have kept it subtle, and these muggles who are completely stupid would also understand. This is something that I wanted to bring out here, that Vernon Dursley would also consider himself or his kind of people as better rather than the wizarding kind, and the wizarding kind considers that they are better rather than the muggles. It's very similar to what we are facing now, where we have a group of people who believes that they are better than the others, and the other group of people believes that they are better than them, and that's the whole reason why there's an unrest that we always have. And I like how JK bought in this thing. That's how her imaginary world is a parallel to what the real world is. One more thing that I really liked, and I don't know whether I am like looking into things and analyzing it very excessively, but a thing that came into my mind while reading this series was J.K. Rowling wanted to show a contrast between the day and night. For instance, when the Vernon Dursley was going through his walk of life, like everyday things, his whole day can be summarized as a boring, mundane, everyday life. Wherein Albus Dumbledore came around night, it epitomizes the fantasy and mystery of the night that brings, and how the wizarding world is completely different, and it's a bit mystical rather than the normal world that we live in. That's also something that I found interesting. I just thought I might just speak about it over here. And okay, one more thing I just wanted to say, that through this podcast I would be talking about various things that I feel while reading this book, and sometimes it might be right and sometimes it might be wrong. So if you feel that there is something that I said does not align to what J.K. Rowling wanted to convey, please you can just send a mail to my email ID that I've mentioned in the description of the podcast. The email ID is cantipotterpodcast@gmail.com. So you can send a mail to me with whatever grievance that you have, because it's the first time that I'm making a podcast and I'm sure that it's not at all perfect. I just wanted to like keep talking about this Harry Potter series, and I thought like it would be a better way if whenever I talk about this series and I would record it so that I would put on the internet, and everyone who have the same craze about this Harry Potter series can listen to it if you want. So that's something I just wanted to share about it. So like yeah, we can again come back from that tangent and say that Minerva McGonagall was talking about how things should be kept subtle, and how these people are not, how the wizards are not keeping it subtle, and the muggles are able to find out that there is something fishy going on. And that's when J.K. Rowling tried to introduce her antagonist of this whole series. And they were talking about you know who, and we all know that this is Voldemort. And the people who might have not read this series also, they might know that Voldemort is the guy with no nose. So keep that in mind. So they are talking about Voldemort, like how she had heard the news about Voldemort killing the Potters and whether it's true. And that's when Dumbledore confirmed that yeah, this is true. Voldemort killed both Potters, that is Harry's parents, and somehow whatever happened, Voldemort was not able to kill this child, which is Harry Potter, and not able to kill this child was also a part of his demise, wherein Voldemort, they have no clue that what happened to Voldemort, and they are celebrating to the fact that the 11 years when Voldemort was in this wizarding world, and it was full dark times where people were getting murdered who were not his followers, who did not wanted to align to what he stood for. So this whole terror of him came to a crashing halt just because of a small baby that just almost a year old. While this was happening, I just wanted to say about the trivia that came about, is that Dumbledore was eating sherbet lemon. So I know it's something that should not be mentioned, or it's something so trivial that no one would have noticed, or people would have noticed obviously, but people would glance through it. So sherbet lemon is something that just remember it at the back of your mind, and I will bring it back whenever the time comes around, and that's when you could relate to it. That how J.K. Rowling had planted the seeds for the series further within the first two books itself. Minerva McGonagall said that about what about Potter, what about Harry Potter, the child, who is taking care of him. So that's when Dumbledore said that he has given Hagrid the responsibility of bringing the child. Hagrid came around to the Privet Drive riding a motorbike which was flying. So people who have already read this series, they can imagine this scene very well, like a whole dim black lit pivot drive wherein Dumbledore and McGonagall was standing, and there comes the crashing sound of Hagrid with this motorbike carrying a baby. And this iconic image should always be remembered because this is something that will constantly come up in the later books. This all parallel things, and people who are reading into this and people who have read this would have already understand about the importance of this motorbike. Hagrid handed small baby Harry to Dumbledore, and the Minerva McGonagall asked Hagrid, "Whose bike is this?" So Hagrid said that he borrowed it from Sirius Black, and now Dumbledore wrote a note, small note, and kept it in the basket. Like he just kept it on Harry, but I don't know where he just laid Harry on the floor or he just kept the basket and laid Harry on that. I could just imagine a scene where it's pitch black darkness and there's a house, and in front of the house there's a baby in a basket with a note. So that's what something we ended the chapter with. Dumbledore pointed out about the scar that Harry Potter has, and we as a reader, we also feel that there is something meaningful about this lightning scar that Harry Potter has on his forehead, though we cannot explain it, what the meaning of it, as much as Harry, because he is a baby and he also does not know the meaning of this scar. Just one thing that Dumbledore said that struck me is that Dumbledore said scars come in useful, and indeed they do. With that note, we end chapter 1 of this book, and now it's also the end of the very first episode of this podcast, Can't I Potter? Before ending, I just wanted to say thank you all for listening to this, and there is a message that I will be putting in. So please listen to that so that I could help improve this podcast. And because it's like I said mentioned before, it's the first time that I'm talking about anything. As an introvert, it's very difficult for me to start speaking about subs. It took great courage from me and also a great deal of planning, like how to speak, what to speak. So whenever I finish a chapter, I just make a podcast. That's it. I'll just speak about it. And whatever mistakes I'm making, please, once again, it's a request. Like if you have any suggestion, please do mail me at cantipotterpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you everyone for listening to my podcast until the very end. Like I had mentioned during the episode about a way you can help my podcast. For that, I have created a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link is www.buymeacoffee/cantipotter. When you will go to this page, you can donate for this podcast or become a member. Since this podcast is something that I had started as just a passion project, I want you all to participate in this cause. That is why I have kept the base membership of this podcast for just $3. I will be using these donations for the improvement of this podcast, and my first checklist is to buy a good mic that will improve this quality that you are currently hearing. As of now, I am recording from my smartphone speaker, so that's why the audio quality is not the best. One more initiative that I will be starting with your donation is, for every member that I would be having in Buy Me a Coffee/Cantipotter account, I will be donating $1. That is, I will be donating $1 per member for a charitable cause every month from the donations that you will be giving for my Buy Me a Coffee account. And this charity will be chosen by you all members who would be there in my account, and the list of these charities I will be uploading every month, and through a poll you can vote for the charity that you want to donate for, and the charity with the most votes will be donating $1 per month every month for that particular charitable cause. The catalyst for this charity is my parents, because I have seen how difficult it was for them to earn the daily bread and also afford to give a good quality education for me and my siblings. Now, since I am in a position where I can afford to help someone out, I would like to share this thing with someone who is in need. That's one main reason also why I'm asking for donations from you all, so that we as a team can help others also. Also, this is not at all compulsory that you have to give a part of your hard-earned money to some guy on the internet who you have never met. You can help this podcast, and I would be really glad if you can just take your time to give a good review of this podcast or send a mail at cantipotterpodcast@gmail.com if you have any suggestions in which way I can improve this podcast further. Thank you. Until next time.
Mischief managed.